John commented on your status. Mary poked you. Bob posted on your wall. In today's society, these phrases have become a part of the everyday vocabulary. Teenagers, young adults, and adults use some form of online social networking daily. Whether it be in the form of Facebook, MySpace, or Twitter, or some other form of blog site, social networking has become a mainstream form of communication. Today, I will be discussing the history and development of online social networking. This type of networking has become a key outlet in which people use to communicate. 73% of teenagers and around 47% of adults use some form of social networking site daily. I personally can contribute to these statistics as I have several online social networking sites, and I do indeed log into them frequently throughout the day, constantly checking for any and all updates I may have received while I was away. During this presentation about online social networking, we'll be looking at a couple of different things. First, we'll talk about the early online sites, and then we'll discuss the development of the 3 top online social networks: MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter. There are several early online social networking sites. However, 6degrees.com was the first recognizable online social networking site, and it made its debut in 1997. It was labeled a SNS, short for social networking site, because it met the 3 requirements used to brand a website as a networking site. The first requirement is that it should be able to construct a profile. The second requirement is to be able to create a list of users to share information with. And the final requirement is that the user is able to look at other users' profiles as well as its own. 6degrees.com didn't last and ended up shutting down only 3 years later. The next SNS to hit the World Wide Web was Rise.com in 2001. However, Rise didn't last long, and the next online social networking site to hit the population after Rise failed in 2002 was a site called Friendster. Friendster is known as one of the most significant SNSs to help the startup of what we now know today as online social networking. Friendster had many problems, and by the time Friendster realized the problem that they were facing with their users and their servers, most of the users had moved on to bigger pastures in the form of the newest SNS to come on the scene, which was MySpace. Now, let's discuss the top 3 social networking sites and how they were developed. MySpace hit the ground running in 2003. All the users who left Friendster flocked to MySpace. By 2004, MySpace had attracted teenagers, which is something most other SNSs did not do, and they soon had a large following. Their SNS was unique to other ones because it allowed the user to create its own layout for their own page. This concept was very foreign to other SNSs at the time. In 2004, another SNS hit the scene. Facebook made its debut in 2004. However, it was only available to Harvard students. As the year went on, other universities were able to join Facebook, but not the general public. In 2005, Facebook was made available to teenagers and high schoolers. In 2006, Facebook made its worldwide debut and was available to every person who wanted to use it. The next SNS to hit the scene is Twitter. Twitter made its own debut in the World Wide Web in 2006. By 2007, Twitter went public. Twitter did not become as popular as fast as MySpace and Facebook did. However, by January of 2009, it was ranked as the 3rd largest SNS. Facebook still holds a spot for being the largest and most active SNS on the internet with over 600 million users. These top 3 sites are still all in use to this day. They each have different ways in which the users communicate. With MySpace, the users mainly communicate through comments on other person's profiles or through personal messages. Just recently, they added their own chat feature where people can instant message another online user. Facebook has several different means in which a user can communicate with other users. They can comment, message, post, chat, poke, and a variety of other things. With Twitter, the user is limited to only 140 characters postings, making it the text messaging of the internet. All 3 SNNs have many users. MySpace, however, is at the bottom of the list and has almost lost a lot of its followers to Facebook. MySpace currently has 34 million users, while Facebook has over 600 million, and at least half of them are online daily. Twitter is slowly making its way to the top. They have over 200 million users, and that number is steadily increasing. Social networking is very complex and vast world. With the onset of the computer age, social networking has become an acceptable form of communication across the globe. People are able to communicate and stay in touch with people on a social networking site that they otherwise would never speak to due to schedules. Social networking has its pros and cons and is evolving every year as one of the fastest forms of communication. So in closing, the next time you type your username and your password into your social networking site of choice, and you see that little red box indicating your notifications, realize that you are a part of a new generation of online communicators. LOL.